talk is going to be about Snowpack. And now I know that our lightning talks are normally very fast-paced, but I thought that we could do things a little bit differently today. So I just want everybody to get comfortable because for the next 2.5 hours, we're actually going to do a deep dive and go line by line through the source code of Snowpack.
Woo! Happy April Fool's to you too.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't resist. Yeah, as today's April Fool's, I just could not resist that. So I just want to see people's reactions. But honestly, yeah, this lightning talk, we're going to keep it lightning quick and to the point. So I'm sure many of you are probably asking, what is Snowpack? So yeah, in keeping in line with the talk today, Snowpack actually describes itself as being the lightning fast front-end build tool. To summarize it simply though, I would describe it as the faster, easier alternative to Webpack. So Snowpack is an unbundled development server that uses the browser's native support for ES modules to create a blazingly fast developer experience. The Snowpack dev server will build a file only when it's requested by the browser. That means that Snowpack can start up instantly, usually in under 50 milliseconds, and scale with your project as it grows without slowing down. Now, all of this sounds great, but I'm sure a lot of you are probably still wondering, what problem is this actually trying to solve? So this talk is for anyone who has felt like this poor individual in the top image and spent what feels like an inexplicable amount of time waiting for their application to either start up or to see the changes they've made in their code be reflected in the browser. It's common in larger projects built with traditional bundlers like Webpack to take a minute to start up and several seconds to reflect a tiny change in your code. So we all know that this takes away from the developer's experience and their productivity, even if it does help produce a more performant product for the end user. Snowpack really examines this idea and sees if we can create a great developer experience in addition to a great end user experience. So another issue that many developers have faced over the years is that as we've asked more from our build tools, they become much more complex. So anyone who's ever had to look at a 400-line Webpack configuration file and try to make sense of what's happening can understand the sentiment. Both of these issues can be summed up from one common pattern, I'd say, and that is code bundling. So bundling is a process that merges your files across your project into a few, if not only just one single file in the most optimized manner. So creating optimized code definitely does not sound like a bad thing. So why has this process led to so much headache for developers? In order to figure out why bundling our code has led to a subpar developer experience, we first have to ask the question, how do we get here? So in the early days of the web, only a little bit of JavaScript was needed in our web pages. But over time, as the websites and applications we built started to grow and the level of interactivity demanded from these sites rose, the amount of JavaScript increased as well. So around the early 2010s, we started to realize that having a long list of script tags in our HTML was not a good idea, and build tools such as Grunt and Gulp, they came about to help standardize optimizations, such as concatenating, minifying, and uglifying our JavaScript code. So you could say that it was also around this same time that code bundling really started to become the norm. In 2015, we had the introduction of the ECMAScript 2015 specification. And this is commonly known as ES6. So not all web browsers, however, were quick to implement the features from this ES6 spec. And so tools such as Babel were created to allow developers to write their code in the newest syntax, but then still allow the older browsers to run their transpiled code. So I would say it was also around this time that Webpack gained a lot of popularity because it allowed you to implement more modern optimizations of your code, such as code splitting, tree shaking, and lazy loading, all of which still required bundling your code. So now that we've seen that code bundling has been the norm for about the past decade or so, you're probably starting to wonder, what's changed that's giving rise to this movement of unbundled development? So the major change that has happened is that ES modules are now widespread across browsers. So ES modules are a mechanism for splitting JavaScript programs up into separate, smaller pieces. If you've been working with modern ES6 or later versions of JavaScript, then you'll be familiar with this syntax. Now, even though ES modules were introduced in 2015, it's taken many years for them to be introduced across most browsers. Today, however, over 92% of web users' browsers have ES modules available. And all you need to do as a developer is create a script tag with the type set to module. In these two screenshots over here on the left, you can see the difference between Webpack and Snowpack. So if you look at the top one, the Webpack example, Webpack almost always returns two JavaScript files, a main.bundle.js and a vendor.bundle.js. So while this does limit the amount of requests the browser needs to make, while you're developing, you have to wait for Webpack to rebundle your code each time you make a change to pretty much any file in your project. So Snowpack, on the other hand, sends each file separately and only when the browser actually needs it. The browser will also cache each file it requests so that it only needs to make a new request for the file when the file actually changes. So this diagram over on the right illustrates how much time could be lost due to waiting to the bundle recompilation step to complete when it's really not even needed. So now that we've discussed the benefits, let's dive into a demo of how you could get started with Snowpack. Okay, so I've just created a simple project here to demo how the Snowpack dev server really works. So the first thing you'll notice here, if we open up our package.json file, is that we need to install Snowpack as a dev dependency here. What you'll also notice is that I've just included two script tags here, a start and a build. The start is to start the Snowpack dev server. Then the build command is to use Snowpack to build our more optimized code. Okay, so now pop open my terminal and start the server. So I can just run npm start. Okay, and you'll notice that Snowpack lets us know that the server started in 17 milliseconds, which is near instant, since the only file that it needed to request initially was the index.html file. That the browser needed to request was that index.html file. And so now if we go and take a look at that index.html, okay, so here you'll see that we just have a very simple HTML file that has a script tag, a style sheet included, and a JavaScript script tag included on the bottom here. And then you'll also note that the type is set to module here. So that way we can use the ES module features. Now Snowpack has a hot module replacement for CSS files so that you can instantly see your changes in the browser without needing to refresh the page, as you would expect from a modern build tool. But we're going to focus primarily today on just the JavaScript files. So if we come over to the browser here, and we open up the console, and we look at the network tab, and I'm just going to do a hard refresh. Okay, and so now we can see what files were actually requested by the browser. So we see that we have two JavaScript files initially requested here. And these two files, they come from Snowpack, and they just help with the hot module replacement that we're going to benefit from. And then you see the third file here is our main.js. That's actually coming from this repo. And so now if we go and take a look at this main.js file, okay. So you'll see here that I've just uncommented some code to import and call a function from another JavaScript file called hello in rhythm. So let's see what happens if I save this file now. Okay, so we see that the HMR, hot module reload or replacement JavaScript files, their status code, it's switched from 200 to 304. So that means that these files are now currently cached. The browser did not need to make like an external request for them. And then if we look at our main.js, we see that this code is 200, and that's because the browser did need to make another request for it. It could not use the cached version because there was a change in that file. And then you see as well that hello in rhythm.js also has a status code of 200 because this is the first time that we're requesting this file. And so there's no cached version available. So now let's go and take a look at our hello in rhythm.js file. Let's see what's in there. Okay. And so here, we just have a couple functions to update the text on the page and to create some confetti. And inside this file, we can also see where those last two requests are coming from. So the canvas confetti one, this first one is coming from line 1, sending a request to that URL. And then the second canvas confetti is actually getting the actual JavaScript we need to run to create that confetti effect. Okay, so now let's see what happens if we make a change inside this hello in rhythm file. Okay, so we see here that the hot module replacement files, those are still cached, and main.js is now, the browser is now able to smartly take the cached version of its main.js. And the only file that I needed to change was the hello in rhythm.js. The canvas confetti and the canvas confetti.js were also received from the cache, from the browser's cache. So as we can see, there are some clear productivity benefits to developing in this unbundled manner. So your browser only needs to request the files it needs when they've actually changed. Okay, so when you're done with development and ready to build your application for production, you can use the command snowpack build, which I showed a little bit earlier inside the package.json file. So I'm going to open up another terminal window here, and I'm going to run the command npm run build. Okay, now if we come over here, so we see that Snowpack will now build your project in an unbundled way by default. So while developing in an unbundled way is good, we do still want our end users to have an optimized experience. So if you decide that you still want the benefits of Webpack optimizations for your code, for your final shipped code, then we can quickly create a Snowpack config and add in some of the functionality of Webpack. So here you can run, close this, if you run npx snowpack init. Okay, so that will create a Snowpack config file for us. So open that up. Okay, there's some additional options that we can add, but yeah, we really only need this one option here for the plugins. Okay, then if we wanted to use Webpack, the only thing that we would need to add here is to use Snowpack's Webpack plugin. So we can use snowpack/plugin-webpack. And that's all you need to include Webpack optimizations to your project. Okay, so in review, unbundled development can have major increases in developers' productivity by decreasing the amount of time you spend waiting for your project to build. Now, the team behind Snowpack believes that you should be able to use a bundler because you want to and not because you need to. Okay, so it's because of these benefits that it's no wonder this project has reached over 17,000 stars on GitHub. And in 2020, it was voted number one for developer productivity, boost in the 2020 JS Open Source Awards. And it also came in first place in the annual State of JS survey for highest developer interest and highest developer satisfaction. Okay, so some potential drawbacks still exist for this project. So one of them is that it's still in the early adoption stage. So this project is only a little over 2 years old, and some parts of it, such as its built-in code optimizer, are not fully stable yet. Another potential drawback is that there might be some difficulty in transitioning large projects from like an existing Webpack configuration to Snowpack. And the creator of Snowpack himself, he said that this is probably best suited for new greenfield projects, and that it might take some inspection to see if the existing plugins that Snowpack has available can replace all of your needs from your current Webpack configuration. But Snowpack does actually give you the ability to create your own plugins if needed. Okay, and then a third possible drawback is using this on legacy browsers. So for development purposes, you will not be able to use legacy browsers with Snowpack. So if you're a devoted IE11 fan, then yeah, you'll have to find an alternative. Okay, but if you're ready to dive in and get started with Snowpack, there are a few different ways you could get started. You could fork my repo. You could check out some of the starter templates that they made available, or you can pop open your terminal and you can write in this command here to get started with a blank template. Okay, and if you're interested in learning some more about Snowpack, then these are some useful links here that you can check. Okay, so I want to thank you all for listening. I hope you're all very interested in using Snowpack in your next project. And I think that once you experience this way of working, it'll be very difficult to go back to the status quo of bundled development.